Welcome to another edition of Cal's Corner radio show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network, otherwise known as XZBN.net. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. And our executive producer, of course, is the one and only legendary in my mind, Rob McConnell. So welcome back, folks. Folks, we have a jam-packed show today, meaning we've got a lot of information to cover. So let me cut to the chase. We're not going to do any news updates because there's been no major story breaking to justify that. In other words, missiles have not been flying yet to punish Syria, although they will. What we're going to do is continue with part two of our exclusive show here with ace investigative journalist and longtime investigative reporter, Art Levine. He has a wonderful book out that I would encourage everyone to read. And I'm not one prone to melodramatics, despite what my critics say, but I'm going to be very blunt with you on this because I am a blunt kind of guy. The issue of universal health care affects all of us. It doesn't matter whether you're rich and can afford a doctor or not. It is a universal human right to have decent health care. And it is disgraceful that the United States of America, which is the world's only superpower, is the most advanced country on the earth that has no decent health care plan. That is inexcusable, it is immoral, and it has to change. How many more people have to die before our so-called representatives in Washington, D.C. get off their butts and start doing their job? Now, this is going to be a very blunt show, and Art's going to share with you some very shocking data. And I would encourage everyone who cares about the future of the United States or people in general or considers themselves to be moral to go out and buy his book. It's called Mental Health Incorporated: How Corruption, Lax Oversight, and Failed Reforms Endanger Our Most Vulnerable Citizens. Now, before we bring Art on to talk about the book and answer some questions, I'm going to just read to you real quickly a quick summary of his chapters. Their names speak for themselves. He has an introduction. Then chapter 1 is Drugging Our Kids. Corporate Greed Joins Corruption, Apathy. That's very interesting. The second chapter is Nursing Homes, Drugging Our Seniors to Death. I think that title speaks for itself. Chapter 3 is The Secret History of the Veteran Administration's Tragedies in Toma and Phoenix. Remember the VA scandal, folks? That wasn't the only one. Chapter 4, The Secret History of the VA Scandals. Part 2, The Empire Strikes Back. And no, this is not about Star Wars. 5, A Marine's Descent into Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Hell. 6, Stan White and Veterans Search for Truth and Answers. Chapter 7, Mr. White Comes to Washington, FDA Showdown over Seroquel. Chapter 8, Drug-Free PTSD Recovery. Chapter 9, How LA County's Mental Health Officials Neglect Inmates and Ignore Violence. That should interest anybody who cares about America, especially you liberal progressive Californians. Chapter 10, To Live and Die in LA, How DMH's outreach work saves lives, stops mass shootings. And again, the subject of mass shootings should concern every American, regardless of whether you believe in the Second Amendment right to have weapons or not, guns. Chapter 11, Torture in Alabama. Torture, again, is a subject that should concern everybody. 12, Profits and Losses from Residential Treatment. The story of Bain Capital, Mitt Romney's company again, and CRC Health. Chapter 13, Recipe for Disaster, ? Residential treatment programs for addicts and kids. You know, drugs are a serious problem with America's youth. It should concern everybody who loves their children. Chapter 14, Florida, Free Fire Zone for Killing, Abusing and Raping Kids. Again, self-evident that title or that chapter should be of interest. Chapter 15, Karen's Story of the Mental Health System That Never Was, Saving Families, Young People from Lifelong Madness. Chapter 16, Why Can't We Just Do What Works? Now that is the $64,000 question. It's something every American should ask themselves, not only about the issue of universal health care and why our representatives have screwed it up, even under Obamacare. Why can't we just do what works on everything that is important? There's no excuse. Then there's Chapter 17, Putting People Before Big Pharma, Overcoming the Barriers to Recovery. Then he's got endnotes Assistance, Advocacy, and Information Resource Guide, Acknowledgements. So this is a very awesome book. I started reading it. I'm not finished with it. And what struck me was how it just starts off with a bang. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you real quickly before we bring on Art. I'm going to read to you the first part of it here. And again, I think you'll agree that it's very moving. Now, here we go. Now, this again is in the introduction. So, after 38-year-old Army veteran Steve Tompkins came home early one April evening in 2014, it didn't take much to set him off when he started arguing with his second wife in their home in South Charleston, West Virginia. Tompkins's name has been changed to protect his privacy. He's a real figure, though. It's not a fictional character. The hulking 6'4", 350-pound man was bloated and a bit dazed from the high dosages of all of the Seroquel, that Depakote, excuse me if I don't pronounce these medicines correctly, lithium, and other drugs his doctors had thrown at him for nearly a decade since he returned from his final tour in Iraq. Now, that would be the war in Iraq. But the medications couldn't quiet the depression, anger, and the murderous thoughts that could explode at any time. He had been waiting for weeks to get into the specialized PTSD 60-day unit at the Clarksburg Hospital and could barely take all the strains of his life anymore. The fights with his ex-wife over visiting rights and with his teenage kids, his despair, and the stress of being constantly broke with two young children. I was overwhelmed, quote unquote, he recalls. All I was doing was throwing out red flags. So when his wife Jolene told him that they didn't have $40 to pay someone to cut their overgrown lawn, and added that he shouldn't have spent $200 on a wood lathe, a dark cloud of rage and anguish gripped him. I can't take this pain anymore, he declared, hurrying up to the stairs to get the guns. Tompkins moved quickly and methodically, changing into black fatigues for his final mission. He strapped on a green Army chest rig and jammed in 7 extra 30-bullet magazines to go with the AR-15 assault rifle and the .40 caliber and .45 caliber pistols that he grabbed from his personal armory of 24 rifles and guns. He also attached a pouch to his belt to hold even more semi-automatic rounds. His wife, their 2-year-old girl, and their 6-year-old boy started crying when he came down the stairs and ordered them out of the house. Jolene refused, knowing that if they left, he would surely kill himself and take out anyone who tried to stop him. As they were arguing, his ex-wife called from Georgia to remind him that his 13-year-old son's birthday was the next day. He asked his son to come to the phone, and he told him, "Hey, buddy, I'll see you on the flip side of Valhalla." His ex-wife, picking up on the farewell to his son, immediately began crying and hung up the phone. Then she called the South Charleston police emergency line. About 5 squad cars were dispatched. The police cars pulled up outside. The cops got out of their cars and took over, ready to train their guns on Tompkins if he stepped out of the house. Inside, Tompkins was still urging his family to leave when Lieutenant Guy Ambergy, a military veteran and a skilled negotiator, called the Tompkins home, got Jolene on the phone, and tried to convince her to leave, with Tompkins following unarmed. Quote, "He's not going to do that," she said, as recounted in the police report, and she didn't agree to leave either. Tompkins stood nearby, looking out the window and waiting for the right moment to rush out and start shooting, willing to go out in a hell of bullets rather than go to jail or keep on living with his PTSD and unending misery. Finally, he warily got on the phone with Ambergy, who said he wanted to help Tompkins and his family but needed him to come outside. "Do you believe a man is as good as his word?" Ambergy asked, veteran to veteran. Tompkins agreed, and Ambergy vowed that he wouldn't be put in a police van, but would be taken in an ambulance to a hospital. As Tompkins waited impatiently, Ambergy, talking to him with the cell phone in hand, approached the front door from the side of the house. Tompkins agreed to come out, but only if guns weren't pointed at him. As Tompkins stepped out onto the porch, arms raised, the police officers on the street started shouting commands and leveling their guns at him. Feeling betrayed, the veteran shouted, "Let's end this. F you all." At that, Ambergy whipped around to face his fellow officers and pumped his arm downward, shouting, Put your effing weapons down. The two of them then resumed their negotiations, and Tompkins agreed to walk on the side of the house to meet Ambergy, but not before he pulled up his shirt to show he didn't have bullets strapped to his chest or any weapons on him. The lieutenant patted him down and found the pouch with the magazine rounds. Ambergy asked him to walk to the end of his sidewalk, sit down, and wait for the medics. At that point, Tompkins, who was as tough as anyone when he was an M1 tank crew member fighting in Iraq, began to cry. He said, "I've been trying for weeks to get help there, and everything is full." He moaned, "It's too bad it takes something like this to get help." More than a year later, he was still waiting for admission to the special PTSD inpatient program. Now, that's all I'm going to read from Art's book. Again, I would encourage you to get it. It's available everywhere, especially on websites like Amazon.com. That scenario that I've just described is not only a true story that Art writes about, it could be right out of a Hollywood movie. How many times have we seen somebody, a veteran, snap it and lose it and resort to violence because they're desperate, mentally ill, or whatever? There's a whole backstory to this. There's a whole bunch of reasons this is happening, and there's a bunch of reasons why it has now become an epidemic. So what we're going to do is have Art Levine join us after the break here, and he's going to take it from here, and he's going to explain a lot of things that we all need to know. We'll be back after this commercial break.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifeology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com.
Welcome back to segment 2 here on Cal's Corner Radio Show on the X Zone Broadcast Network. Once again, my name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, folks, we started with an introduction read from Art Levine's new explosive book on the just the corruption and scandals and the whole problem with the healthcare industry. So, Art, welcome back to part 2 of this show. And let's start with a question here.
Well, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here.
Same here, Art. Let me ask you this. Is it safe to say that big pharma, big food, big insurance have all conspired to make every American citizen essentially a customer or patient for life? One inherent contradiction in big pharma is that if everyone gets cured, has great health, their profits are affected. Have we become essentially a Prozac nation, as it was said years ago, as is our societal and cultural addiction to drugs, to take a pill for everything, the direct result of corruption and greed of big pharma?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. Yes, in a big picture way, too many of us take too many medications for no good reason. However, the difference is that there's appropriate use of medications, both in terms of mental illness and in terms of pain. So, for instance, if we take mental illness and behavioral issues, there's a massive overprescribing, maybe as many as 60 million prescriptions a year of antipsychotics, almost for kids. The use of it for kids, over 90% is for no sound medical reason. And for adults, it's about 75%. That is literally insane, that these dangerous medications, antipsychotics, that should be used very judiciously for people with schizophrenia, and in some cases can be appropriate perhaps for people with bipolar disorder as an adjunct treatment, is widely used for insomnia, anxiety, PTSD, and that's why in my book I document some of the tragedies and deaths due to the overuse of antipsychotics. Similarly with opioids, it's a very complicated issue, but important to understand, and you're not getting this from the mainstream news media, and you're not getting it from the country's leading health officials, the state and federal government. So big pharma played an enormous role, and this is well known, through particularly companies like Purdue Pharma, in ramping up overprescribing of opioids. And I described that in both my Newsweek cover story and in chapters in my book about how big pharma just wrote checks to VA researchers who then turned around in 2003 as over medication with opioids was ramping up, and put out guidelines, federal guidelines, joint guidelines by the DOD and the Department of Veterans Affairs, the first major national guidelines of any influence, that literally put in those guidelines that opioids were, quote, rarely addictive. And I have in my book and in Newsweek, I have an actual, and you can click on the link to it, you can see the chart. It's an actual grant chart, and just read for the word grant, read bribe. So it's an actual chart that you can read where they have payoffs to different health organizations as part of their scam and scheme to convince people that opioids were very harmless and, quote, rarely addictive. So that's the part of the story that is well known, and it's best told through the book Dreamland. The other part of the story is not being told at all at this point by major national news organizations or health officials, and that is the crackdown on prescription drugs right now that is happening is increasing suicides among chronic pain patients, and moreover is very likely increasing overdoses on illegal opioids that are counterfeit and illegal, and only a smidgen of those deaths, relatively speaking, of the total 64,000 deaths of all forms of medication, including opioids, come from prescription drugs, and many of those are illegally obtained prescription drugs. Yet, so what is happening, and I have an article that is likely to be published next week in Huffington Post looking at the tragedies of chronic pain patients who are facing extreme harm and danger because of a crackdown on prescription pills, a very simple solution that is not addressing a complex issue. So this is I have heartrending stories of a chronic pain person killing himself in front of his own wife. I've interviewed the wife. You can read it next week in Huffington Post. You can see the danger that's happening because what is happening is a very simplistic response that is the mirror image of the opioid ramp up of overprescribing. And this is a very important issue that is simply not being grasped or understood by liberal media, mainstream media, or public health officials to any real degree. And that is, yes, big pharma can increase a massive increase of overprescribing, nearly a quadruple from the late 90s through about 2010. There was a quadrupling in opioids, and there was a lot of false marketing about how should be widely used for all sorts of pain problems and so on. However, since a peak year of 2012, that was the peak. It's sort of leveled off at 2010, and then it continued at that level, a pretty high level, admittedly, but then it's fallen about 20% since then and continues to fall. But however, our response, like, you're fighting the last war, a bad idea for generals. So we're fighting the old war, which is let's crack down on those prescriptions. And the way Jeff Sessions, for instance, and the DEA are approaching this issue is let's, on one hand, it is appropriate to stop illegal drugs and importing of counterfeit fentanyl, but they're also focusing on cracking down on legitimate doctors who are appropriately prescribing, but at high dosages for people with chronic pain. And this tragedy is being ignored.
Okay. So give me 3 quick examples of corruption by Big Pharma.
Oh, my God. Well,
only 3, Art. We have to
okay.
get through the show.
So so one of them is when they were developing Seroquel, which is this antipsychotic, which has pretty flimsy evidence to begin with. They basically had to hide the fact that it was causing massive obesity and diabetes. So one of the top researchers at AstraZeneca, and these are allegations contained in lawsuits, AstraZeneca, I need to note, has never admitted guilt on anything, although they've paid many, many millions, hundreds of millions in fines.
Okay, that sounds like Donald Trump.
Right. The researchers did this. They actually did a study, found that the patients got incredibly obese and at high risk of diabetes, but they created a summary of it and they omitted the data, and the top medical director congratulated this medical official, whose first name is Lisa, and go, "Great smoke and mirrors job, Lisa." In other words, this is internal documents congratulating a colleague on faking data that they would then submit to the FDA.
So Art, that depends on what your definition of the word is, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. But here's the other thing is, so they hide all of the dangers. That's a commonly, there's in fact an excellent website and campaign internationally that, of course, much of the United States and health organizations, drug companies are ignoring and flouting. It's called alltrials.net. And what it documents is this issue. About 70% of all clinical trial results are not reported anywhere. Why? Wow. Because people are dying, or people get ill, or there's a high dropout rate. So they just prefer not to report it. So that's like one example. So
Okay,
another.
so what you're saying is they're only reporting the good news.
Oh, absolutely. There was one study that showed that. So what happens is, like in the case of antipsychotics, the drug industry, basically, this is a technical issue, but very important to understand how bad uses of drugs spread. So basically, there's something called off-label use, which means a use that's not approved by the FDA, but doctors are allowed, under their professional authority, to give medications in their best judgment, even if a use is not approved by the FDA, as long as the drug is on a market. So this basically is a loophole that is the size of 100 Mack trucks that every single drug company in the last 25 years has used for falsely marketing the drug to doctors. And then every major drug company has paid fines for fraudulent marketing. So over the last 25 years, according to Public Citizen, about $25 billion in fines have been paid by these companies. Well, guess what? That's peanuts. So Seroquel, for the life of its patent, can earn as much as $5 billion a year in AstraZeneca after they were caught, falsely marketing it for PTSD and insomnia and nursing home patients who were talking too much at night. All these completely off-label uses, but they were marketing it for kids.
From our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond, you're watching the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Demo.
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State-certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, They conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to the third segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show. My name is Kal Korff. I'm your host. And once again, the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, Art, I asked you for 3 examples of corruption by Big Pharma. Give us at least one more real quickly, and then we'll move on to some other areas.
Well, the biggest example, there's just so many. The biggest current example is the massive campaign by Purdue Pharma to completely corrupt American healthcare around opioids, and so they started propagandizing. And there was a kernel of truth that the pain was undertreated. So what they did was they started bribing essentially the Joint Commission, which handles oversight of hospitals. They began giving everybody grants, and they began claiming that these weren't addictive. And one of the things that they rested on, it's a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine that was just a doctor reporting based in 1980s data that very few of acute care patients discharged from hospitals who got opioids were ended up addicted, and this became the basis for a endless campaign costing hundreds of millions of dollars that these drugs, based on a very narrow letter that wasn't a controlled study, it's just an opinion based on review of one hospital, they began quoting and referring to this as this prestigious, I believe it's New England Journal of Medicine, could have been JAMA, Journal of American Medical, but it's a prestigious study that found that less than 1%. That was the key thing. So a 1980s based letter based on acute care patients when very few opioids were given out, relatively speaking, found that less than 1% of people discharged from a hospital ended up being addicted. This was transformed into a massive propaganda campaign that less than 1% of all people who receive opioids end up becoming addicted. It is still being quoted by some people. It is nuts. That's not the case. It's possible that for opioid naive patients who never had opioids and had no history of substance abuse, that may apply to them. However, in general, it doesn't apply. However, for chronic, so this became the basis of this massive propaganda campaign that was justified. Now, this is the key point of the fraud. What happened is, using the excuse of wanting to help chronic pain patients who did in some cases legitimately require their use and are now unfairly being taken off them, it turned into a criminal operation that is unprecedented in American corporate history. They basically began this massive flooding of marketplaces. So their excuse always was, oh, we're doing it for the pain patients. Well, that is no more valid excuse than Gotti in his neighborhood saying, we care about all you individuals. Here's a turkey for Thanksgiving. It was my attorneys who I've interviewed who are now suing Big Pharma. They say diversion was the business model, and that's extremely important to understand. So
now, when you say diversion, what do you mean?
By diversion, I mean that they were pumping out, let's take this town of Kermit, West Virginia, that got 9 million pills to one pharmacy for a town of under 400 people.
Wait. 9 million pills for a population of 400?
Absolutely.
Where the hell is the logic in that?
There's no logic. It's part of a completely corrupted system. And the Washington Post, 60 Minutes, and the Pulitzer Prize winning Charleston Gazette have all reported on this. There is no logic. So essentially, you would think that the DEA, which has the authority to monitor oversupply or suspicious uses, would have done something, but they didn't.
What year did this happen?
This happened between like 05 and 012 or so. In other words, I can look up the exact. In other words, it
across
happened
2 administrations.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And this over ramping, and the Charleston Gazette people looked at much of this failure did occur in the Obama administration. Okay,
Hmm.
so in other words, a lot of these problems occurred after Obama took over.
Okay.
However, the seeds of it and the failure to take action against reckless over medication that by and large did not go to legitimate chronic pain patients. That's what's not understood now or then. It was so there was some, so essentially all of the propaganda was being used as a rhetorical tool by the drug industry to create a generation of addicts.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's what happened. And now, unfortunately, people who were not substance abusers who have really serious chronic pain, and about 25 million people have very severe chronic pain from 200 or more medical conditions, like I mentioned last week, but could, like various things like cystitis and 200 different medical conditions. That's a urological condition causing burning pain. Uh, many medical conditions have long-standing chronic and severe pain, and about maybe at most about 9 million patients who are in chronic pain until recently were taking opioids. But when you look at the total number of prescriptions that rose, there were 255 million prescriptions written for opioids like in 2012. This was so what would happen is if you have a town like Kermit with a corrupt pharmacy in league with drug dealers and
Hmm.
criminal cartels, they would then, feed it out, and there would be these, it'd be called the Oxy Trail. They would basically run it from Appalachia, sell it around, but also there was a lot of diversion in which there were pill mills. There were pill mills where people would just give it out freewheeling, and people would go up, claim they had pain, and then they would sell most of the drugs.
Okay, let me ask you this. Why is there this resistance then to providing universal health care done right, when at the very least, if the US did it like Europe long ago figured out, it would make big pharma and big insurance trillions of dollars because everyone would theoretically be a patient? Why because now you got millions of people losing their coverage, so they're not going to become customers. They're gone out of the market. So why doesn't big pharma and big insurance say, "Hey, healthcare for everybody. We love it. We love you. Now everyone can have their pills. We laugh all the way to the bank. It's you get cured. Win-win." Why isn't that going on?
It's a mystery to me. I think it's because of the nature of American politics, in which um, big pharma and insurers, they want to guarantee. So insurers had to be dragged in to support the Obamacare legislation because they were worried about that they wouldn't be that they were barred under Obamacare from not serving people with pre-existing conditions. Pharma, it's they have a lot of clout. They could have been a stronger supporters, but I think part of the concern was that if there was any kind of greater expansion of oversight as part of expanding access, then they would have faced greater scrutiny. But a very important thing to understand is, and this is what my book, I'm a very non-ideological, I'm a liberal, I'm a progressive, I'm exactly for the kind of universal health care that you're for and most progressives are for. But one of the myths that's not understood, particularly by liberals, is that access alone is not any guarantee of quality care. And that's
That's
what I
true.
talk about in the VA. So what the part that everyone knows about the VA is there were the long waiting lines, people couldn't get in, and like 40 people died in Phoenix because they were on these long waiting lines, and we should fix that and make it easier to get in. However, the kinds of things that I'm describing involve reckless overprescribing that killed Jason Simkokoski in Toma, Wisconsin, and over 30 different patients of that one hospital died from over-medication of opioids given out willy-nilly by a medical director who was not sanctioned in any way for close to a year. And the VA covered up the deaths. This is very critical. They covered up the deaths until a great journalistic group, the Center for Investigative Reporting, broke the story in 2015, but it wasn't noticed by media outlets on the East or West Coast. They broke the story, and only then did the VA admit, well, maybe we should have done something stronger. But the VA knew what was going on, knew that people were being fired left and right by this medical director because they didn't want to go along with the reckless prescribing. And one of the pharmacists who objected, one of the psychologists who objected, killed himself because of the pressure on him to go along with dangerous prescribing that was killing patients. Now, the key thing to understand, this was killing patients under medical care as delivered. It was not a Black Widow, evil psychopath deliberately going out to kill patients. This was death resulting for medical practice as okayed. And when the very loose and essentially corrupted Inspector General of the VA looked into it, they said, no big problem here. We're not even going to publish a report. So the report was buried and killed in March 2014, and then August of 2014, for the final time, Jason Simkokoski is admitted to the Toma, Wisconsin hospital. He has both addiction and anxiety, and what do? They just keep pounding more opioids into him. And at the time he died, he had 16 different drugs in his system, and several of them had fatal interaction warnings attached if they had all even looked at their computer screens, but the software itself fails.
That's medical malpractice. We'll be back after this commercial break with Art Levine, our guest.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howell expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
I'm William S. Peckham. If you enjoy a good mystery with a touch of the paranormal, then you'll love my novel, From Out of the Woodwork. It's the story of a young Toronto contractor, Sean Kennedy, who buys derelict homes, guts them, and turns them into multifamily dwellings. Slums just waiting to happen. When Sean buys 29 Livery Lane, the house fights back. Former owners unexpectedly come out of the woodwork as he starts the destruction. The apparitions come to him when he touches old books, reads hidden letters, rummages through old boxes, finds a locket, or reads a discovered manuscript of a murder mystery. From Out of the Woodwork will take you from 1899 to the horror of the World Trade Center, September 11, 2001. Check out From Out of the Woodwork on my website, www.williamspeckham.com.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of the show here. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host on Cal's Corner Radio here on X Zone Broadcast Network. The executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Art, you are a walking encyclopedia of this stuff, and I wish this show were 2 days long so that we could get over everything. We're going to have to cut to the chase, as I say, here in this last segment. Let me ask you this. What would you say is the correct path going forward that we're not doing? For example, you have a chapter commendably called Why Can't We Just Do What Works? Well, why can't we?
Well, okay, so a lot of that chapter is devoted to effective programs for the severely mentally ill people, including something called supported employment that allows people with very severe disabling mental illnesses, and there's as many as like 16 million with serious severe mental illnesses and disturbances, adults and children, to actually hold down meaningful work that's competitively applied for while getting treatment right now, but that's not being used. In addition, so that would be an example. Why isn't that being used? Because there's no incentivizing to use it. In other words, if you do junky treatment that makes no difference in anyone's lives, you're going to get paid the same. If there is some incentivizing a little bit, but basically bad outcomes doesn't necessarily lead to a reduction in payment, particularly in the mental health field. And this is how crooked everybody is. When they do impose outcomes, like on hospitals, Medicare had something to impose. This is relevant to this situation, how people just game the system. So basically, when the outcome was reduced heart attacks from your hospital, when people enter for cardiac surgery, reduced deaths, what do? So instead of improving it, they just stopped admitting at hospitals people with really serious cardiac issues and let them die elsewhere so it wouldn't affect their database. It's juking the stats. Juking the stats is basically essentially business as usual across the healthcare field. So that's in part what accounted for the VA waitlist scandal is all the regional administrators and hospitals reporting, yes, you want a 14-day waiting to get in within 14 days, no problem, here it is. And that was all fabricated. So, and it happens in the nursing homes. I talk about that too. So essentially anything that relies on unverified reporting by the healthcare field is likely to be false and used to defraud taxpayers. So how does that change? One of it, which requires a change in the culture of enforcement, where there has to be real enforcement. And it's my view that all these major agencies like HHS and the VA, they kind of have these very weak inspector generals. And at least in the, and what's needed is very aggressive health fraud prosecutions so that people who fabricate, right now, all you hear about medical fraud is you hear like doctors in little clinics around, clinics around the country being arrested for medical fraud. You never get really major hospitals or certainly big government agencies. So one of the issues that I talk about in HHS, this is hard to believe, but over 92% of all kids who get antipsychotics, getting them for fraudulent off-label purposes, and HHS's stance is we can't enforce it. We can't do anything about it. In fact, it's in the statute. So they're basically allowing practices they know are fraudulent and dangerous to continue unimpeded. So how to get this to change is my feeling is, in terms of bad practices, it's what I sometimes jokingly refer to as the Bubba solution. Until you have executives of drug companies in jail and prison sentences with someone named Bubba, you're not going to see any change, okay?
Yeah.
Until they go to jail and prison. Now, and so the hardline solutions that Trump is proposing, including death penalties for drug dealers and reducing all opioid prescriptions by a third in 3 years, that isn't going to help. And I can assure you that when they mean drug dealers death penalties, they're not talking about corporate executives knowingly marketing drugs that they know are killing people. They're not talking about lining up I'm not for capital punishment, but their tough line on drug dealers is only on street dealers. If
Right.
they included corporate executives, crime in the suites, as part of the issue. So that's one issue. Then the other is stop. I have two big lessons from my book. One, first, do no harm, the basic of the Hippocratic Oath. Second, do what works. So one of the harms that's going on right now is the massive cutbacks because of this draconian cutbacks in opioid prescribing for legitimate chronic pain patients who are being involuntarily taken off their opioids. It's increasing suicides. There's some early evidence that there's some early data that's emerging that indicates that perhaps, and this is very sketchy data, it's not been well chronicled. Another problem, no one's counting this, is as many as twice as many people, chronic pain patients who were taken off opioids, appear to be killing themselves compared to those pain patients who remain on opioids. The data is initial and preliminary. I'm not saying it's final, but this is some preliminary data, and there's overwhelming anecdotal accounts. So coming up next week, you can read more about it in an article that will be likely appearing in the Huffington Post. They're working on it starting next week, editing it. A major piece looking at the different ways that patients are being harmed. And one of the tragedies that's occurred was the CDC, in response, a well-meaning response to this opioid epidemic, issued advisory guidelines of 90 MME, morphine milligram equivalents, for primary care doctors dealing with pain patients who had never used opioids. So that seemed like a reasonable thing to do. When it came to chronic pain patients who had been on it for years, they had no such limits, and they just recommended weighing current benefit and harm. And the person who's written about this most knowledgeably is Dr. Stefan Kertesz, Kertesz. I urge everyone listening to read his work because he explains it very clearly. So these were these voluntary guidelines, first-time opioid users for primary care doctors. What happened is this voluntary recommended for this narrower group has turned into involuntary mandates where many of America's 9 million, let's say approximately, chronic pain patients taking opioids are being suddenly cut off very rapidly, and they're going through withdrawal. They're not giving meaningful alternatives, and many, we don't know how many because no public health agency is taking a full count, are killing themselves as a result. So this is the level of, so one of the things is stop doing harmful. Now, how to improve pain care is a very tricky issue, and in some cases, opioids are necessary. For first-time pain patients, more judicious use of medication. But these very severe chronic pain patients have not been helped by alternatives. And I have interviewed them, and these aren't people who just went from nothing, taking an aspirin to taking opioids. Unfortunately, we have the chief law enforcement officer of the country, and it's reflected in a lot of work by the DA as well, saying the following. Jeff Sessions, he says, I am operating on the assumption that this country prescribes too many opioids. I mean, people need to take some aspirin sometimes and tough it out a little. Now, this level of ignorance, if you've been in agony for these severe or you've had botched back surgery, which is common, all too common, and you're in screaming agony, taking an aspirin at night once and toughing it out isn't going to work. But that, in fact, is the governing mindset of almost all public health officials and law enforcement. And if you notice in the criticisms of the Trump announcements, there was very little mention by the liberal and mainstream press about how draconian and counterproductive the crackdown on prescription drugs was.
Well, I think for my own view on why that's happened is first of all, if the liberal press were the champions of this cause, we would have heard about this years earlier. Somebody other than Art Levine would have blown this open. Secondly, they're too focused on Russia and prostitutes, and Trump's sex life suddenly matters, even though what he did was 10, 12 years ago. I'm sorry, there's hypocrisy there. Art, we're going to have to wrap it up shortly.
There's one area, but there's also hypocrisy among conservatives and Fox News.
So but that's a given.
But let me explain. When it was Obama's VA, Fox News was all over the VA for corruption, deaths, TOMA, all the time.
I know, the so-called death panels, but
right. No. I'm talking about
MSNBC. Who isn't all over this.
No, please listen to my point. I'm saying of the Department of Veterans Affairs. They were highly critical of the VA when it was Obama's VA. Now that it's Trump's VA, they're pretty much silent.
Okay, but where's MSNBC on this?
That is a big failing of liberal media coverage.
Because one is on one end of the spectrum, MSNBC is on the other. And you and I have known each other long enough back in the days where MSNBC wasn't so ideologically driven. I'll just use politically correct English, just like I worked with Fox a long time ago before they became right wing.
But I'm a big fan of Rachel Maddow's work on MSNBC. So I'm a liberal, but there's liberal hypocrisy going on right now.
To me, it depends on the issue, as with everybody. So thanks, Art, for joining us. We're going to have to wrap this up. I'm sorry about that, but we will absolutely have you back again. I'll also try to continue to alert people about your wonderful book. I'm going to finish reading it, I promise. And folks, if you care about the future of this country, please get it. Welcome again. We'll be back next week for another episode.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifeology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.